The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
This is the Giles and the Goalie podcast as part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. With your hosts, Giles Farrell and Ben Remington.
Welcome to the Giles and the Goalie podcast. Special welcome to those who are viewing this on our YouTube channel. I am your host with way too long hair, Giles Farrell. Next to me on my left is Ben Remington.
Hello.
It might be different because we're doing this on Zoom, so everyone's got a different setup.
Yeah.
We are doing a special show today. We're trying, again, something different. We're going to try not to steal an idea from a sports cable network, which show rhymes with Surround the Born.
Right.
But we are going to do something similar to that, and that we have brought in some special guests. The first of which is from the Bar Down Beauties podcast. We have Jesse and Alexis. Ladies, how are you doing?
Hello, we're good.
Hello, what's up? Thanks for having us.
And joining us also is the members of the Locked On Wild podcast and former guests of this podcast, Joe and Tony.
Yay. And there was much rejoicing.
How's it going?
I took a slight pause when I saw Tony was named Paul Fenn. I was reading straight off the screen. I was like, that's not right.
Yeah.
How did
Paul
he
Fenn
get
is
in
not
here?
joining us today, although that would be
There was a
great
trade
podcast.
made. He made a trade, actually. That was what happened. And
been hacked.
here we
Breaking
are.
It was
news.
1 for 1.
Yeah.
It was a hockey trade, yeah.
It was a hockey trade.
Yep.
He's a game breaker.
I saw
is
that
he
I could do it,
vindicated?
and I could not do it.
But is he vindicated? No.
Yeah.
There's some good things there, but anyway, for another show. So Ben is the one who's been driving the boat on this show, so I'm going to give the floor to him, and he will describe how we're going to go about this.
Yeah, as Giles mentioned, we are stealing very, very blatantly from the worldwide leader here. We'll call this Around the Boards. How does that sound? Is that a cute enough? Is that
It's a good
nice
hockey
ring to it, yeah.
connection.
I have
yeah.
to be honest, when I said my rhyme, instead of saying born, I almost said a word ending in ORN that started with P. I was like, oh, no.
Oh, no.
How's quarantine
That is-
going over there? It's going
Yeah.
well, huh?
I mean, we're already going to get sued for the plagiarism anyway, so
Yeah.
you might as well just go the full mile.
Just make everyone mad.
Yeah.
Go the full mile and get fired, right?
Well, that's that too. So anyway, so we'll use basically the same format. We have 5 writers that will be speaking, or 5 personalities rather, instead of the regular 4. But that's fine. We'll eliminate probably 2 in the second round. I think is how we'll do it. Give everybody a nice chance to speak their piece and answer the questions that we have. So I'll probably just announce the 1 point. Verbally, since there isn't a fancy graphic on the bottom of our screen. And
We'll just hold up fingers.
yeah, it's going to sound a lot like scoring at Hogwarts, but that's just kind of how it's going to go.
You're gonna have a tally board or a whiteboard behind you.
I've got a piece of notebook paper
There you
here,
go,
so
okay.
that's super scientific and
Sophisticated.
definitely won't screw it up at all. So we'll just see how it goes. But yeah, so we'll get started here. If you guys are ready, we'll kick it off here with the first word as it's known. Topic that's obviously been brought up recently, more so with the season more and more coming into question. And an article done in The Athletic about it. Mikko Koivu is in the last year of his contract, and there's a lot of speculation before the season if this would be his last year or not. The knee injury that he suffered late last season, obviously, kind of plays into that a little bit at least. But I will throw it to you guys. Do you think we've seen the last of Mikko Koivu in a Wild uniform? Will he retire? Will we see him elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera? I'll throw to Giles first. What do you think?
You have a pick of guests and you start with me.
Go with familiar, right? It's
House money.
Yeah, I
Right.
guess. Go back to the wall. This is hard because, first of all, from what I gather, he doesn't let you know what's really going on inside his head a whole lot. Even more so than most hockey players, which is, really
Saying something,
tough to
yeah.
crack. Yeah.
Mm.
I did find it fascinating. I think it was in that piece that you referenced in The Athletic where he said, he'd probably go play in Finland. So that maybe kind of hinted that he might be done after this season. But I don't know. It's such a weird place because the season just stopped cold turkey, and you would hate to see that be his last appearance in a Wild uniform. Just have that be it and not have some kind of proper send off. But again, it's kind of a toss up for me.
Yeah. All right. I'll throw it to Alexis.
Yeah, I when this first happened and the season got suspended, I had it in my mind for a few weeks that I was never going to see Mikko Koivu play in a Minnesota Wild jersey again. I just kind of thought that's it. I don't think he's going to, because I think a lot of people thought he was going to retire at the end of the season back when we all assumed the world was going to be normal at this point in time. And so when everything kind of got halted, I thought, yeah, he's going to be done. Now, as I've had more time to think about it, I think that kind of to what Giles said is that I don't think he's the kind of guy who wants to end his NHL career like this. I can see him being the kind of guy who's too stubborn to be done now. He wants to have a proper end to his season, hopefully one more run at a Stanley Cup. We know he's been with this team his whole career in the NHL, so he obviously cares about this team. He cares about winning, and I have a hard time believing right now that he's going to call it quits, at least in the NHL.
Yeah.
I could totally see him playing in somewhere else, like Finland or something like that. But I don't know. I can just see him being too stubborn to quit now and want one more full season to have a chance at a Stanley Cup.
1 point.
Mikko Koivu stubborn? That sounds fascinating. I have no idea.
I'll throw over to Tony. Tony, what do you think?
So I agree that Koivu has the one emotion that Koivu does wear on his sleeve is competitiveness, and I totally understand why you would say that he wouldn't want to end his career that way and he'd want to come back. But here's the thing: it is not up to Mikko Koivu, at least not entirely, and not even mostly. If Mikko wants to come back, all Bill Guerin has to do is say no, and he's not going to. And I think that Minnesota has a glut of forwards that they want to keep elevating into higher and higher roles. Joel Eriksson Ek deserves a higher role. They might even want to bring Alex Galchenyuk, thinking that he thinks that, if he thinks that Alex Galchenyuk at his age is going to be more of a contributor than Mikko Koivu at age 36, 37, why would he want him to come back? I would hate to see him end his career this way, but I think that unless your goal is to kind of avoid like a bad PR thing, bad blood, I think that he's not going to come back because it's not up to him.
Yeah, that's fair. Jesse, what do you think?
I mean, you brought up a great point, Tony, that I was going to kind of speak on too, was that it comes down to Bill in deciding what he wants to do with this team and what he wants to do with Mikko. However, I will disagree with Tony on the fact that Bill was a player and he knows what Mikko's probably going through a little bit, and he has a heart and he has a little bit of compassion. So I think if we're able to work something out with Mikko to allow him to come back, I don't think you'll see Mikko in any other jersey outside in the NHL. If they decide that, hey, we're done with you, we're going to part ways, I think then he says, okay, I'm done, I'm retiring.
1 point.
I was actually in on that call that we had with Mikko last week or 2 weeks ago that Russo wrote off of in The Athletic. And while we talk about Mikko does have a great poker face, he kind of let that down a little bit for the first time that I'd seen in a while. Like there was a lot of very honest conversation that he did kind of have with us. Of course, it could have, a lot of it's probably lip service, but he is taking it very seriously. And he said, he thinks about it every day. He's spoken with a lot of his former teammates that have retired and trying to weigh every single option out. So I think he's kind of come to terms a little bit more with maybe this is his retirement and maybe this is how it goes out. So I think, like everyone said, you could see it going both ways. I would say Bill might have a conversation with him as they look at how we resume things, and maybe gives him some sort of different option. But otherwise, I wouldn't be completely shocked if Mikko did just hang it up.
Right. Joe, what do you think?
I think there's many things that are important to Mikko Koivu, but I think the big thing is actually playing for one team in his entire career. You got to go back to the trade deadline. He had a chance to go somewhere, and he decided to not to. He did not waive his no move clause, and I think that while he might show competitiveness, I don't believe that he shows or he believes in like poetry. I think that he had already come to terms at that point that this is probably going to be it. This is going to be a swan song, even if this kind of, I guess, act of God with this COVID-19 outbreak that might cut it short. I don't believe that he's going to come back just to play out the string. He's not somebody that would just come back for ceremonial purposes. In my mind, I think he comes back if he thinks that he can compete and he can play a full season. But that's where I'm at. And you guys brought up the Bill Guerin thing, but I think, to me, at the trade deadline, that looked like a player that was ready to come to terms with just himself, his age, and where he was at in his contract and in his career, and he was ready to walk away from it. So that's where I stand with it.
That was another point. Yeah, no, I think all good points there. I think the way this season ends too could play a big part of it. The NHL seems like they may want to finish out the regular season. And if that's the case, especially if the Twin Cities ends up being a neutral site, that could play a huge part in that. Not that there's going to be fans in the stands, of course, but that could play into it. So along those same lines, follow-up question to this. Mikko Koivu is number 9, has been talked about being the first Wild player to get raised into the rafters. Certainly deserving from a longevity standpoint, from a character standpoint, but maybe not necessarily from a production standpoint. What do you guys think of retiring Mikko Koivu as number 9? Alexis, I'll start with you.
As much as I appreciate Mikko Koivu as a player, as a person, as someone who I've had the chance to get to know over the couple of years I've been with the team, I just don't think that's the way to go. I think once you start retiring numbers based off of either, like you said, longevity or just like fan appreciation, I think that kind of loses the luster of why we retire numbers in sports. That kind of takes away from people who actually put up the numbers to do that. And not to take away anything from Mikko Koivu's game at all. He's done a lot for this team production wise. But that's for like the elite. And as much as I would love to see a banner get raised in the XL other than, the 18,000 fans, I don't think Mikko Koivu is the one to do it here. So yeah, as much as I like him as a player, as a person, I just don't think that's the move. But yeah.
Okay. Tony, what do you think about retiring number 9?
So here's the thing, right? The retired numbers is not just about, honoring a player. It's about preserving history and making sure that certain names are preserved. And I think Mikko Koivu's name is a name that deserves to be preserved in Wild lore. And it's one that, 20, 30 years from now, we should still be talking about. Mikko Koivu has been with the franchise since almost the very beginning of the franchise, has established himself. Really, the identity of the Minnesota Wild through its first 20 years goes through him. It goes through his defensive play. I was just looking at some of Minnesota's defensive numbers, and I think I think there were 2 years in the years since we have data on it that Minnesota was not a top 5 defensive team, and like most years they were top 3. And I think the last 4 in a row they were the best defensive team. Like, there is no denying that impact on that side of the ice for him. And I think that should be taken into as much consideration as the offensive numbers that he put up. And were they the best? No, but also, I think that you can, if there was a stat for goals taken away, right? I think that Mikko would be first in this franchise and maybe not knocked off by anyone ever in the future. So
okay. That stat for defense, was that expected goals?
Expected goals, yes.
Okay. All right. I kind of figured. All right. Jesse, what do you think about the number 9?
I would say no. Much to a lot of Alexis's points. I think there's a number of players that should have been considered that have been a little bit more impactful with the Wild organization than Mikko. I think from, of course, an appreciation and standpoint that's there, which is why I think the Wild will consider doing it, because they want to show him that. And we're all about emotions and sentiments and all of that stuff. I mean, number one fans, you guys saw that jersey's retired up at the X, right? I know, it drives me insane. So as much as I would love to see that, I just don't think that there's enough substance there to validate that. You know, I nothing against Mikko. It's just kind of the way it is. There, like I said, a number of players I would rather see retired first before Mikko gets that honor.
Well, okay. Joe, what do you think about retiring Mikko Koivu's number?
I've always felt like I've been in the minority on this by arguing that the retired numbers should be for Hall of Famers. And I've kind of stand by that, Pat, because I think that had we gone with nostalgia or honor or whatever, you'd have guys like Derek Bugard or Wes Walls or
Darby
Hendrickson, probably. I mean, and you can go on the nostalgia and the feels that this team has kind of caused and created throughout the years. But the fact of the matter is, you retire a number, yes, to preserve the history, but the history is usually that player being absolutely elite. And they're usually reflected by a Hall of Fame nomination or an induction to the Hall of Fame. And I feel that this team, after 20 years, probably doesn't necessarily have the history to really say like, yeah, we have a Hall of Fame player. So now I would say that, you know, if they were to take down the number 1 and put up the number 9, and then I call it a fair trade.
Point for Joe. Love that idea.
Yeah, if you're asking to swap out the banners, that's a whole different argument.
That's
100%.
10 out of 10. All right, Giles.
Here's a compromise that I have to propose, just because there's disagreement. What if we retire Mikko Koivu's number, but it's not 9, it's 21 when he first came into the league?
You know, I think there's something to that.
Away.
Yeah,
we're going to do a Kobe Bryant 9 and 21 retirement.
Yeah.
9 is an incredibly common hockey number. I think that could play into it. So, Giles, you the last word. What do you think?
Man, to piggyback on Tony's point, Mikko Koivu has kind of been the connection of so many different eras in Wild history. He came up in the very tail end of that early team that had that playoff run, but they were, you know, not doing as good at the time. And then they had the 2 playoff years in 07 and 08, and then he stuck around through the rebuild and then through another run of playoffs and now through another rebuild. And so I think there's something to be said that he's stuck around and he has kind of connected the different eras. And
point for Giles.
I have to agree with Tony that when you look at the history of the Minnesota Wild, one of the first things you're probably going to be reading about is Mikko Koivu. So I think you have to, at this point, just on that fact alone.
Yeah. No, it'll be very interesting to see what the Wild end up doing with that. And it'll really kind of set the bar, I think, too, is an underrated aspect of it, because some teams are very liberal with retiring numbers. I think the Sabres have like 18 numbers retired or something like that. Certainly the Canadians do too, but it's the Canadians. So
if you played 4 seasons and won 2 Stanley Cups with the Canadians, your number's retired.
Right.
They also have a long list of Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And other teams absolutely do reserve it for just Hall of Famers. And so it really kind of, it's going to set the bar, kind of whether we like it or not, as to whether they're going to retire borderline folks or not, because Koivu was very much on that borderline. So, all right, on to happier topics that everybody loves to talk about. Everyone's favorite Russian, Kirill Kaprizov, seems like he's coming over this year. Seems like if there is a season that starts in a reasonable amount of time for 2020 to 21, that he'll be on the squad. So my question is, how do you think that he changes this Wild team? How much of an improvement or how drastic do you think the changes are when Kirill Kaprizov shows up? And I will start with Tony on this one.
How much did it change the Minnesota Wild when Kevin Fiala broke out and showed himself to be an absolute superstar?
Case closed.
It did it a lot, right?
Yeah.
He comes up, he emerges, and all of a sudden, this is a different team. This is a team that you could not pay people to watch this team early on in the season. And by the time Fiala bursts out, this is suddenly a hot ticket in town, right? Kirill Kaprizov is just doubling that up, and I think that excitement, that injection of adrenaline to this team means as much to the organization, just with the buzz that he'll generate, as it will with the offensive production, which I expect by year 2 is going to be absolutely electric.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Jesse, what do you think about Kirill Kaprizov coming aboard?
I mean, in addition to the pure skill and talent that he has that is almost non-existent on this current Wild team, that youth, it kind of now puts another bean in the youth jar that they desperately need. It injects a life in there. It's kind of gives those younger players another guy to kind of be on, not that they're separated, but on their side and say, this is our team and this is the team that we're going to help create. I agree with Tony. I think it'll be year 2. I think he'll be really good in the first year, but you got to consider there's that learning curve just to the NHL as a whole and to North American hockey and everything here. So I think by year 2, we're going to be like, Gabby, who was that player that was good? Cause he'll be far and beyond, even a Marian Gaborik.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The North American thing, I think, is maybe underrated because it is a different game over here than it is over there. So, Joe, Kirill Kaprizov, your thoughts?
Transformative. I do think that this guy has a real opportunity to become a selling point for the Minnesota Wild as an exciting team. Kevin Fiala started to do that towards the later part of this year, and I think that if Kaprizov can excite that fan base, excite the national fan base. National TV pundits are going to talk big about the Minnesota Wild. I think it's only become more of a selling point for the Minnesota Wild as a brand nationally. And I think that if you bring a superstar Russian kid, it only has the absolutely a possibility to really capture the imagination of hockey fans around here. And I don't think that he's absolutely solving every single issue for the Minnesota Wild, but man, he can cover. I think he's going to be able to cover up a lot with his skill. And if they continue to keep developing their youth and their young players.
So you're saying he can't play goalie is what you're saying?
I was just going to say, can he play goalie, do you think? Do you think that's the thing?
All right.
I don't know if I want him blocking shots either.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. Giles, Kirill Kaprizov, is he the savior?
I hope so. I mean, that seems like a lot of pressure. They're just the cynic in me just still wonders, like, what else is going to go wrong that prevents him from jumping over here? It just
coronavirus.
I was going to say a global pandemic, maybe. I don't know.
And then in the middle of this, he's switching agents again. So it's just there's always something that adds another wrench into the process. So if they can get him here, yes, he'll be their knight in shining armor. Yeah, you think so? All right. I think so. All right, I'll finish with Alexis.
I think Giles chooses death by 1,000 paper cups.
Was a very negative take, Giles. Alexis, do you see Kirill Kaprizov turning this team into a playoff contender?
Yeah, I mean, everybody kind of covered all of the big points there. I think the two biggest ones for me would be the excitement factor. And with the excitement factor brings a level of expectation that I don't know if the Wild have had before. I think maybe when Suter and Parise came, there was some of that. But I think seeing such a young guy come into the team in the league like that, I think there's going to be a bar that's really set for the Wild, which hopefully will make them step up their game and try to achieve that level. So I think that'll be a really good thing for the Wild. The other thing is I think he might be kind of that missing offensive piece in the sense that the Wild are starting to show hints of really being a team who can snipe, who can score goals when needed. We've seen Kevin Fiala start to do it, which has then kind of come through the lineup a bit, and we've seen the Wild be a bit more offensive. I think he could really be that piece who makes the Wild an offensive team. They've always been talked about as a defensive team. When Jacques Lemaire was the coach, it was defense. We brought up the point earlier about how, they've been a very defensive team from the beginning of their existence. So I think that could maybe make the Wild a bit more of an offensive team. And I think teams are a little bit more scared of offensive teams in general. So I think that could be a really good thing for the Wild to kind of strike some fear offensively.
I saw somebody today compare the year 2020 to the Minnesota Wild.
Oh,
and I just thought I would. I thought I'd put that out there since we're talking about.
Act like the 2019 Detroit Red Wings just don't exist. Like, what are we doing here?
But yeah. Mm-hmm. So.
As long as they don't compare him to Batman Forever, we're good on it. So.
That way you don't have to file a cease and desist either.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Like the one we're gonna get from ESPN. All right, so moving along, another big offseason move. We kind of mentioned it earlier. Goaltending, obviously, going to be one of the hotter topics this summer as far as something that's probably likely to change with this team. So along those lines, Devan Dubnyk has a fairly buyout-friendly contract, and for a lot of reasons, and some of them natural and some of them unfortunate, his performance has not been very good in the last season, 2 seasons really. So how likely is it that we see a Devan Dubnyk buyout this summer, and is it the right move? And I'm going to start with Jesse on this one.
I'm glad you did, because I have a lot of thoughts on this. Dubes is by far probably one of my favorite guys. I mean, he's wonderful, and I know he listens to all of this. So Devin, if you listen, really sorry about that. But you know what? I think unless you are aiming to get a goaltender in this offseason, which they should, I think they should definitely be considering that. No, I would say you maybe hang on to Devin. I don't think we saw enough out of Capo last year. I would have liked to see more from him to know what we have in him, right? I mean, Alex is Alex, and Stalock will play the way that he plays. I think he put his, he's definitely more of a number one goalie, maybe between the two, but he's still not a starting goalie in the NHL in general, all encompassing. And right now, neither is Devin, but I think until you know what you have in Capo, or unless you're saying, hey, we're going for a goalie this offseason and that's one of our biggest needs, then sure. But otherwise, I would say hang on to him, because like you said, he's cheap. I mean, it's not like you're shelling out a whole lot for him. And he has the capability to perform well. If he can get out of his own head and kind of get back into that groove, he will be a solid goaltender for you. So I would say maybe just hang on to him. But if there is a buyout, then that means that Bill is addressing that need, you would hope.
Right. Joe, what do you think of the Devan Dubnyk situation?
I think that Chuck Fletcher had a little bit of some premonition way back when he signed this deal. You think back to 2015 when he re-upped. It was a 6-year deal with the last 2 years being relatively cheap and team friendly, whether that was going to be through a trade or whether there was going to be some sort of buyout. You know that when a player gets a certain age that their performance is going to go down. So do you buy him out? I think you absolutely can. You got to have a plan, but I think you can, and I think his contract makes that friendly for the team to do that.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. It was funny, just a quick aside. I told my wife about the questions I had for this episode, and I mentioned the Dubnyk buyout. And I was like, well, he hasn't performed all that well in the last couple of years. She goes, well, is he that old? And I'm like, oh, shit. Well, honey, he's the exact same age as us. So, yeah, he is. He is that old in NHL terms.
Yeah, right.
He's literally a month younger than older than both of us. So,
yeah.
Anywho, so let's bump on to the next one here. Giles, what do you think about buying out Devan Dubnyk?
I know it's friendly, and I know it's tempting because we've been it feels like we have PTSD from all the buyouts the Wild have had previously. But I think there's a very strong case to be made for not buying him out and just kind of riding out the last year. We know he's had a lot to deal with this year, on the ice and off the ice. And, you hope everything off the ice goes well, gets better. And if it does, he could come back and he could have a renaissance next year. It's not out of the question for goalies at his age to still play at a high level. We know he can play at a high level. And unless you're absolutely sure you're going to get, a goalie that's going to be your number one for a while at least, why make a change? Because the goaltending market outside of maybe the top 1 or 2 guys is, not great unless you want to sign Robin Lehner to a long-term deal. Why bother? And as Jesse said, Capo Kakkonen didn't get enough of a look, and it, didn't help his case that Alex Stalock got hot around the time that he was with the Minnesota Wild. So I'd say just go against it.
Yeah. All right, Alexis, the Dubnyk conundrum.
Yeah, I would say ride it out as well, and then kind of reassess the situation when his contract is up. I just think that we're a year, 2 years removed from him being top 3 in the league in goals against average, save percentage, and wins among all goalies in the NHL for like 2-3 years in a row. So I mean, we know that he can compete. We know that he can put up the numbers. We've seen him do it. We've seen him do it consistently. And like Giles said, this was a tough season, or Joe, whoever said it, about with his wife and everything. So and we know goaltending is such a mental position more than any other position in hockey. So something like that happens, that's going to be more debilitating, I would say, to a goaltender than to any other player on the ice, just as far as how you get your head back into the game. So I think that's tough. And then with, Alex Stalock playing so well when Doobie was out, then it's like, well, then they just kind of did 50-50. And then it was like more Alex than it was Doobie. And it was just kind of a very strange season. And now we've hit this pause. And so I think you just give him the rest of his contract to finish out. Show him that, goaltenders need a chance to prove themselves to be able to play well. If you don't give a goalie an opportunity, when they do finally get that opportunity, they might not be up to what they were at because they weren't believed in when the time was right. And so I think you got to give Doobie the chance because he's shown that he can do it. And kind of what a couple other people said too, I don't really know what a better option would be at this point. Who's on the market who we would want, who we know for a fact would exceed far above what Doobie can do. So I think you just finish out the contract and then from there you reassess and see what's on the market when his contract's up.
Yeah, that's fair. Tony, you got the last word. How do you like the goaltending market this summer?
So I do not want to give away my article for zone coverage on Tuesday.
Plug.
But there are points on the line, so I'm going to do it.
You can tease it.
You chose wisely.
Before we get into the market, I do want to talk about Dubnyk and just how bad his performance was last year. He was worth, according to Evolving Hockey's wins above replacement model, as minus 1.7 wins above replacement. Only Jimmy Howard, PK Subban, and Johnny Boychuk performed worse last season. And when you look at goalies since 2007, 2008, that season, who have had a minus 1.7 WAR or lower. Out of those 23 players who have had that, 7 never played in the NHL again, and another 8 never had a season where they were above replacement. It is not a good sign when your goalie suddenly cannot make a save, and when it's at that age, it is doubly alarming. So I would say that you cannot go into next season having Devan Dubnyk starting 60 times as your plan A, and then Alex Stalock and Kaapo Kähkönen as your plan B. You need to go out and you need to land somebody. I don't know who that is. Like, I can't say, like, for sure player X would be better, but just off the top of my head, Jacob Markstrom's a free agent. Robin Lehner's a free agent. This is a tough offseason. It's going to be a tough offseason with the salary cap either coming down or just having so much money lost that they're going to be giving so much of it back in escrow anyway. So maybe you can sign one of them to a 1-year deal, but even if you sign Markstrom or Lehner to a 3 or 4 year deal, I think you kind of got to do this, because here's the thing. With next year being such a big year for you, Kaprizov's first year, you do not want Kaprizov's first year to be a team in the gutter.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that your goaltending isn't going to be your Achilles heel. And I think that's, unfortunately, parting with Dubnyk is probably the only way to guarantee that.
Yeah, fair points. It really comes down to, I think we can talk about the free agent market all we want, but we really have no idea what that's actually going to look like this offseason, because we have no idea what the end of the season is going to look like, if it's going to look like anything. So, that's entirely fair, Tony. So great points all. That is the end of round 1. I'll go through the scores since people can't see them on the screen. We have Alexis leading us with 7. Tony next with 6. Jesse has 5 points. Joe has 4 points, which leaves Giles last. Oh, Giles is eliminated.
This is because I was negative on Kaprizov.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Just stopped handing out points after that.
Yeah, I actually deducted points. So Giles is eliminated. Giles, give us your best Han Solo frozen in carbonite and hold it for the rest of the episode.
Oh, wait. No, it has to be on brand.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
You hold that pose, though.
All right.
Now
so
without another beer.
Yeah. Right. On to the next round. It'll be buy or sell. Let me know if you're buying or selling these general ideas. So first up, we just talked goaltending, and Devan Dubnyk buyout is a part of that, certainly. But there's a lot of things that can be done. We mentioned Kaapo Kähkönen, we mentioned Alex Stalock as an option, and along with all those UFAs or keeping Devan Dubnyk, a lot of stuff. So do you buy or sell Bill Guerin being able to fix the goaltending this summer with Kaprizov on the coming aboard for next season, because it's going to be very important. So I will throw it. Let me start with last, Jesse. So I'll throw it to Joe first.
All right, I'm going to sell Bill Guerin on fixing the goaltending just because I think this offseason is going to be one goofy offseason. and I think that unless you're making some sort of trade, it's going to be really difficult to get a goaltender that fits underneath the cap. And I have a feeling that they might be trying to figure out more on Kaapo Kähkönen. So I feel that they're going to try to give Kaapo another chance to really kind of show what he can do next year. And for me, I think in order to do that, you can't go out and get a number one. Now, do I think it's the right move? No, especially if you have Kaprizov coming over. But I think that going younger, going cheaper, they have to give him a chance. And by going out and get a number one or spending a lot of money on another player, even if it's just for 1 year, you're going to give that goaltender more games. And I think they want to really give Kaapo Kähkönen the time and the lack of stress to just kind of go out there, make your mistakes if you have to, but we really want you to be really good and we want to figure out what you're worth and what you're worth to us as a team. And that's where I think that they're not going to really go out and address the goaltending issue, at least this offseason.
Sure. Alexis, what do you think about Guerin fixing the goaltending?
If it comes down to it where it's a big problem and he has to really go out on the limb, I'm going to buy in on that, because after seeing how Guerin handled this trade deadline, granted, he hasn't had much time with this team and it's been a very weird season with the way everything has unfolded, but I trust him to make the right decisions. And so I think if it comes down to that, where it's going to fall on his shoulders to make a big decision there, I'm buying in on that, just because he was a player. He won cups doing it, and he's done it as a GM. So I trust him to know the game, not only from the management side, but from the player side as well. And I've trusted him so far. And so I trust him to make that decision as well. And I think he understands that is a really big hole for the Wild right now, is getting that filled, and that could really turn the tide for the Wild and make them a top team if they can get that fixed and you bring in Kaprizov and all these other pieces. So I'm buying in on him making the right decision to get that goaltender situation fixed.
Okay. Tony, do you buy or sell Guerin fixing goaltending?
I buy it for this reason. Bill Guerin this offseason only has 2 jobs. There are 17 players under contract. He's got Kirill Kaprizov coming over, and along with Kevin Fiala. That's your star power need checked off the list right there. You have the guts of a solid team there. You just need, granted, very difficult things to find sometimes, a number one center, which that's the one thing that I don't know if I buy them getting, but we're not talking about that. The goaltending, he can focus on the goaltending, and guess what? He's going to have the cap room. If the cap is at $81 million, even if it holds steady at $81.5 million this year,
that's the point.
Minnesota is going to have $15 million in cap space. You cannot tell me that with that much cap space, with so many things taken care of, there are no major UFAs who are departing this offseason. You cannot tell me with all that, a solid forward group, a more than solid, a great blue line, that you can't just say, Bill, you got 2 things to do. Go out, get me a center, get me a goaltender, and not think that he's going to at least get one.
Yeah, another point. All right, Jesse, I'll throw it to you. Do you buy or sell Guerin fixing the goalies?
Going last sucks, because everything that is running me, I'm like, yep, nope, exactly it. I agree with everything. You definitely buy into it. I think Guerin knows what he's doing. Like Alexis said, having been around him this year, there's just this level of trust that you can sense that all the players and everybody involved with the team has in him to know what to do. I mean, he's a proven champion as a player in the management department, so he knows what to do. I don't think it's top priority, but like Tony had just said, there's only so much that he really can do and can work with in this offseason. So I definitely buy in. He'll figure something out. And again, what that looks like for Devin, what that looks like for Capo, what that looks like for Al, it's to be seen. But I think it's definitely something he knows needs to be fixed because it can be better. It's not even really, it's meh, which most of the team is. It's very meh. But sorry to say. But yeah, so I think it's definitely something he's very, very well aware of and is going to be keeping a close eye on this year.
Sure. Okay. All right. So yeah, along those lines, Guerin has another decision to make. And this one, is probably just as important as goaltending and number one center. He's got a head coach to hire, whether it be promoting Dean Evason as the interim coach or hiring outside. But we'll focus on Evason. Do you buy or sell Dean Evason as the head coach next season? And I will start with Alexis on that one.
This is a tough question because how much have we really seen of him? As of right now, I'm going to say sell because I just haven't seen enough to say, yeah, he's who I want behind the bench for the next period of time here. Do I like what he did in the few games he was behind the bench as the head coach for the team? Yeah, sure. He handled it fine. He got the team a few wins. But I haven't seen enough from him to trust him completely yet. And I think there's a lot of great coaching options out on the market right now for the Wild to consider instead. There was 7-8 coaches 7-8 coaches who were fired, and then Bill Peters obviously resigning and all that. So there's so many coaches who are out on the market and so many good ones too. We got Gerard Gallant. I mean, you're saying that guy was fired from Vegas and that's maybe not someone you'd want to consider. There's so many great choices right now. So I'm going to say sell right now and see what's out there.
Yeah. Tony, what do you think? Dean Evason is head coach next season.
I'm going to buy it. I think this offseason is going to be so weird, especially if they bring you back for the playoffs. And like, it might be a thing like Colorado experienced when they ended up, not bringing back Patrick Roy. And then all of a sudden you have Jared Bednar and you're like, who the heck is Jared Bednar? But Jared Bednar comes in, does a really great job. Here's what I really liked about the Minnesota Wild, right? When you look at Minnesota's offensive numbers at 5-on-5, their shots per 60, their expected goals per 60, all that stuff was in the bottom 10 under Boudreau. And when we were looking at it, we were like, oh, of course that makes sense because this team is not particularly talented. All of a sudden, Dean Evason steps in his 12 games coaching the Minnesota Wild. Minnesota was fourth in the league in shots per 60 at 5-on-5, and I think they were in the top 10 in expected goals. So he is turning up the pace on the Minnesota Wild, and that is something that I just love to see. You just love to see that, and I cannot wait to see what this higher-paced hockey, this fire wagon hockey, does with Kirill Kaprizov and Kevin Fiala just running together.
Yeah, no, agreed. It'll be interesting to see. So, same question, Jesse. Dean Evason, or do you buy or sell?
Sell. Tony mentioned, sure, he did. He turned around the team. I don't think Dean did that. I think the players would have played well for anybody that wasn't Bruce at that point in time. I think they just were not responding to Bruce anymore. I think it was just kind of, that's where it lied, unfortunately. I love Bruce. I really do. But I think that was, as a team, they were not responding to him as a person. I think you could have put me and Alexis on the bench, which I tried for, by the way. And they would have listened to us and elevated their play. I think it was at that point in the season too. I don't think that was all Dean, unfortunately. Another reason he just doesn't do it for me. I know that's not fair to him because you're right. We didn't get to see enough of him. There isn't enough there from what I've seen. And I call it the sex appeal, not visually speaking, but you know what I mean? He's just not like that sexy coach when you've got enough other talented player. Peter Laviolette, I would love to have him here as a head coach. And I think that's a very realistic possibility. I also have a feeling that Guerin has in mind who he wants to be the coach of this next team. There was no question the day that he fired Bruce, he had that list in his head, and he's such a well-connected guy. People know him. People respect him in the league. People would love to work with him, I think. So, if he makes that phone call to somebody else, I would see he doesn't have to schmooze to get them here very hard. And again, unfortunate for Dean, but I would say out of here.
I just want to say to Jesse's point really quick, I always told my dad in the few games that Dean Evason was the coach, I always told him every time the camera goes to him, it looks like he's making the hardest decision of his life. He always looks scared.
And that's just it. Like, he was so nice. There were so many opportunities during media availability where the coach always has to just come out and speak to us. That's how it goes. We go into the locker room and then he comes out. And he just wouldn't come. And we're like, he just would keep forgetting. Like, that was what he had to do. And of course he's like new, and I get that. But we were like, where is he? Oh, I'll go remind him again. And he would just be like, hi guys. And he was very soft spoken and nice, and going from Bruce to that day and night. Right. So I think that's a big part of it. And again, he's lovely, but I could do with someone else.
I find that weird because he was a head coach in the AHL, which I'm sure they don't have massive media scrums in the AHL, but like,
right.
You were a head coach.
It's a press conference. You know, Bruce did this, like, you know what they do. So weird.
All right. Finish this off here, Joe. Do you buy or sell Dean Evason as that coach next year?
Well, it depends, because Dean Evason always looks like he just injected smelling salts into his veins. But I'm gonna buy on Dean Evason, and here's why. Ask Kevin Fiala if he wants Peter Laviolette back.
Oh,
he was a guy. He was a guy that Fiala played for Laviolette and did not play well. Got traded, came over to Minnesota. Dean Evason and Boudreau as well. Boudreau got him and played him quite a bit, but he was also scratched earlier in the season. And if you look after Boudreau, if you look after the Jason Zucker trade, he got elevated to 17 minutes on average per night. He led the team in 19 points since that Zucker trade. And I just think that if you're gonna try to build around younger guys, you need somebody that can relate to those younger guys, who's maybe more of a player's coach in a sense. And I'm not even sure about that with Dean Evason, but it sure seems like he is, being a guy from the AHL, he is way more in the mode of like, hey, I got to use what my lineups are regardless of who's in and who's not, because he's used to having his top guys called up to the NHL. He's got to figure out, he's got to get creative. He's got to tinker with his lineups. And if he's got to put his best guy out there three games on a weekend, on a 3-game series or whatever, like, he's going to do it. And that's when we see Kevin Fiala take off. That's when we're going to see Kirill Kaprizov really take off in my mind, I think. And somehow what he did during this break was he was able to get guys like Parise and Suter to start looking for Kevin Fiala. And that just didn't happen under Bruce Boudreau. It didn't happen even under Mike Yeo or anything with any of the previous younger players. And maybe that's Kevin Fiala and him really just proving himself, but it could also be like, hey, like, you guys got to become more of a team player. And that could be also Guerin too. But I think that I think Evason is a guy that can come in. I'm kind of tired of the good old boys club that is NHL coaching carousel. So I say you bring in a guy who's kind of paid his due in the AHL. He might be Fenton's guy, but you know what? He's also a player familiar with one of your best players that's currently on roster.
Yeah. I think we can call Evason's brief foray and the positive results, maybe we should call it the Torchetti effect, or maybe it's the Mike Yeo effect. I don't know how that works exactly, but great points. Great points on Dean Evason. I think that's going to be a tough decision for Guerin this summer for sure. And who knows what this summer's even going to look like. So that could play into it as well. Finally, for buy and sell, are you buying or selling the Wild building a legitimate cup contender with the contracts of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter on the books? Controversial topic, and I know there's a lot of thoughts on this. So excited for this one a little bit. We're going to start with Tony. What do you think?
So this is going off on a limb a little bit, but I'm going to start off and say I'm going to buy it, because here's the thing, right? It's kind of not up to Zach Parise and Ryan Suter at this point, because they're not the engines that drive this team anymore. They are just going to be demoted to the token grizzled vets that every contender needs every deadline. So we got our grizzled vets in order. We've got Kevin Fiala and Kirill Kaprizov. I've said this like a million times already in this podcast.
Are you excited about them coming? Or like being together next year?
I am. If I could freeze myself like Cartman and unthaw myself when hockey starts back up again to see them. I would do that. I'm so excited for this. And then, you have these guys coming in, and they are, over the next few years, they are going to be underpaid as to what their value is going to be. And that's going to offset, I think, the Parise and Suter contracts. And then when you go forward, when you look at the future of this team, right, like maybe Kaapo Kähkönen's starting goalie, well, for the first 3 years he's in the NHL, he's going to be making less than $1 million each year. When you see Alex Hovhanov, when you see Matt Boldy, those guys start to come up, Adam Beckman, those guys are going to come up, and they are going to be making peanuts in comparison to what their value should be if everything goes right. And if everything does go right with them, then it's not going to matter the contracts that Suter and Parise are going to have.
Oh, that's fair. Jesse, what do you think? Can they build a contender with those big contracts?
I don't think so. Not in the immediate future. Unfortunately, I think that's their biggest holdback. There's just not enough good there in the players that they have, I don't think, currently. And then you're going to have to make some big moves, I think, next year again, depending on how the season starts or how this all ends. You're going to have to look at more guys to get rid of and get rid of some of that money. I think it's too much. There's too much of an uphill battle for Bill and for this team, especially with those contracts, to do. I mean, I think Tony's right. I think there's some good youth that are going to be cheap, and there's potential there. But I say potential because really we don't know how any of that will ever translate, right? You can point to so many different players that, sure, at 18, they're good. Even Matt Boldy, he struggled out the gates in college this year, and he was the first rounder last year, and he got better, but there's still, we haven't seen enough. I mean, there's still a lot of growth, and I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains in general, no matter which way this team moves forward. You're going to have a young team, but fans need to prepare themselves that a young team means an inexperienced team and a team that's going to have a hell of a time advancing on. So I would say, no, I don't buy into that idea just yet.
Okay. Joe, are you buying or selling Wild Cup contenders with 11 and 20?
It depends. If the Blackhawks get good again in this time.
Well, they just fired their president. So
yeah.
So here's the thing. We saw this team become perennial playoff team with Parise and Suter, with a crop of young guys. Jason Zucker, Mikhail Granlund, Charlie Coyle, and Nino Niederreiter. They've got one of the best top 4 defenses in the league. They're set there. They've got a new crop of young guys coming in that has the potential to be really, really good and really, really cheap. Some really big high-enders.
Can I interject on that, though?
Sure.
Those guys you listed were first-round picks. The Wild haven't been able to get as many first-round picks as they'd wanted in that. Yeah. So I would, is that a point? Do I get a point for that? That's what I was going for. Sorry, I had to do it.
Is this Judge Nordy? No.
I know.
What show
Still fired up about that.
Anyways, but so you've got some high-enders in there that can potentially make an impact on this team. And I do feel like, okay, so you get guys like Kirill Kaprizov, you get Kevin Fiala, you get some of the young guys, maybe Ryan Donato get some actual time off the fourth line and maybe plays like his production per minute or per 60 has shown. And he shows up and he plays and those guys come in. Zach Parise, as he gets older, we saw even this year, like when he was healthy, we're still, on pace for kind of 30 goals or at least near 30 goals. Mm-hmm. Like, I still think he's a pretty productive player, even as he ages. Maybe the assists aren't going to be there, but you can still count on him for 20, I think, plus goals. And as he gets knocked further and further down the line, like that just strengthens your lineup. And yeah, he might be older, but he's still going to be able to provide. Ryan Suter is kind of an ageless wonder. Like, he still put up, I think he was on pace for career high, like 51 or 52 points again this year. Yeah. Something crazy. They've got Jared Spurgeon locked in. They got Matt Dumba, who's electric on the blue line, if he can regain his form. There's a lot of ifs here, but we've seen a lot of things happen for other teams that, things just kind of catch lightning in a bottle, and this team kind of comes together. And I think that they could figure out a way to build up a contender and at least be perennial deep playoff contenders as some of those other players grow and emerge on this Minnesota Wild team.
All right, fair points. Alexis, finally to you, buying or selling the Wildest Cup contenders?
Yeah, I'm going to buy in on that because I think the only reason this is a conversation that is continuously had is because the Wild have only made it to the second round once with Ryan Suter and Zach Parise. So I think fans are angry. They thought they deserved more with those two players. And when they came to the team a few years ago, they thought, okay, these are going to be the guys that get us a Stanley Cup. And I think a lot of people thought that. And I'm sure the management thought that when
That's
they
what
brought
they told
those guys
us.
in too. Yeah.
Right.
So I understand that the frustration there and the excitement that came with it. There was that high expectation that hasn't been met yet. But I think that there's still the potential. Ryan Suter is a solid defenseman, and he's the kind of defender you want on your team. Zach Parise is going to give you more effort than just about anybody else on the ice night in and night out. So I don't think their play is lacking, and therefore it comes down to the continuous conversation of, okay, but the money, we're paying them so much. It's taking up so much cap space. And to that, I would say, well, how do you know that anything out there is better? How do you know that you would get players just as good, if not better, for a cheaper price? So then you're taking a gamble. You're saying, okay, well, we're going to try to figure out a way to get rid of that and bring something else in. But how do you know that's going to work? It's the same argument you can make with the whole rebuilding thing. You can go ahead and try it. It doesn't mean you're going to win a Stanley Cup in 5 years.
Yeah.
So I just think that because their play is still there, and as Joe said, the numbers are still there for Parise. When he is healthy, he is still performing. He's putting up those numbers. Ryan Suter is getting the most ice time on the team for a defender, and he's doing his job. So I just think that you got to give them a chance. And they're competitors. They are doing their best to get the team to that point. I think there's other pieces that aren't there. That's why they're not getting long playoff runs. I don't think it's the contracts or the players of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. So I just think there's other problems that need to be fixed. And if you get those problems solved, goaltending, top center, all that stuff, I think if you fill those holes, no one's going to be complaining about that again, because the Wild will be doing better come postseason. So
yeah, and they do have the cap space. So
yeah.
Yeah, I will say that money has been spent for a long time, and you can budget around that if you're a money guy. You don't like to have the variables year by year. You can budget around that, and you should be able to work with it. So the money is going to be spent for a long time. It has been spent for a long time. There's no reason why you can't figure something out if you're creative. And
you've committed this much already. Yeah,
exactly. So
no, that's fair. All right, so that will conclude the buy or sell round, and just tallying up the scores here. Alexa's still the leader, 11 points. Tony just behind her with 10 points. That means Jesse and Joe both with 9 points. You were eliminated. I'm so sorry.
Double elimination.
Yeah, double eliminated. We're cutthroat here.
Stupid game.
We're
I didn't want to play anyway.
We're cutthroat here and around the boards. So that's how things go. But it had to be a showdown. It had to be two people. I would have, three might have been a little lengthy. I think Tom's already gonna be mad at us for the length of the podcast. So anyway, on the showdown, Alexis and Tony.
This is like Judge Nardi now.
Yeah,
there we go.
Exactly. So first showdown question, and this one is a little bit out in the ether, but is Craig Leipold hurting this team? We heard a little bit of talk of him meddling here or there, or giving certain directives to certain general managers, but do you think that Craig Leipold is hurting this team, Alexis?
I'm going to say no. I just think, now granted, is there things that happen behind the scenes in lots of situations that fans, media, so-and-so aren't going to know about? Sure. But from what I've heard, I haven't heard anything that's super detrimental to the team. I haven't heard, players and management complaining or anything like that. I just think that the Wild are moving in the right direction, and I think at this point it's going to take a lot to backpedal on that. And from what I've seen, it just hasn't. I don't see the Wild moving backwards. I think a lot of the decisions they've been making are moving forward. So if he is quote unquote meddling, it doesn't seem to be having much of effect, at least not right now. So I think that from what I know about him as a person and as somebody involved in the team, is that he cares about the team. And so I just think that everything I've seen is the Wild are making a lot of good decisions right now. And I don't think we've always been able to say that about the team. And from what I've seen, I just have been happy with what they're doing. So I would say no, he is not causing issues.
Okay. Tony, do you believe Craig Leipold's hurting the team?
Ooh, all right. So we have a situation right now where Craig Leipold has stopped the bleeding of the Paul Fenton era by going out and getting Bill Guerin, right? So good, congratulations, right? But you do not, when somebody willfully slices off their own arm, you don't celebrate them for sewing it back together, and I don't know what they call it medically, but you don't give
I was
them
wondering where that analogy was going.
you don't give them credit for doing that, and I think that Paul Fenton, I'm not, or sorry, with Craig Leipold, I'm not going to say he's been meddling or not, because I don't know these things. Like, I'm not an executive. I have no idea what goes on behind the scenes. I don't know Ryan Suter, but I will say that that by kind of going the I know this guy route when it came to hiring Paul Fenton, I think that did set the team back.
Yeah, good point.
And while some things have worked out, like Kevin Fiala, that's still a year that you kind of lost because you have to change direction again. So in that way, I think that he has hurt the team, and I think that the state of hockey should, and when I say state of hockey, I mean this in all seriousness, I think that Minnesota should nationalize the Minnesota Wild and put it under fan control. But that's just me.
Solid idea.
I never would have guessed that from you, Tony. That's so off character for you to do that.
I think that we should seize the means of ice time.
Anyway, next topic. So there's been some talk and are confirmed, I guess, by Russo. The Wild going to have a retro sweater using North Star colors, and this has been a hot button topic for Giles and myself because we're such jersey aficionados. Is there an identity crisis with the Minnesota Wild not really being able to let go of the North Stars past? Is it a good thing, perhaps? We'll hear more about this on Judge Nordy this week, of course. But Tony, I'll throw to you. Is there an identity crisis here?
See, I don't know why we're freaking out over an identity crisis, because nobody said this when the Carolina Hurricanes wore Hartford Whalers jerseys, and that was a team that's not even in Carolina. Nobody was freaking out saying like, "Oh my God, do the Hurricanes fans think they're the Whalers now? How will they be able to separate past and present?" I think that Minnesota fans are smart enough to know what year it is, and they know it's 2020, and I think that it's perfectly okay for them to honor that history in bringing it back. Just please do not do the lazy route of putting the Minnesota Wild bear head logo and just slapping a North Star color palette over that. Either go and just fully honor it and keep it a fully separate thing, or not.
Yeah. Alexis, what do you think about the identity crisis?
I don't think identity crisis is the right phrasing to use there. I do think there's something going on. I don't think fans can let go of that, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think so many people are nostalgic, right? We want those things that we used to have. We like looking back on the past, especially when it brings up good memories. And I think the biggest thing about this is the way the North Stars left, okay? I think if everything would have been, if it would have just been, hey, the money wasn't there, whatever, if there was a different issue and they had to be moved, I think fans could have been like, oh, that sucks. I want the team to stay, but whatever. I think there would have still been some nostalgia, but not to this extent. You've got Norm Green dragging the team to Dallas because he can't make the right personal decisions, and fans everywhere are losing their SHIT over it. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast. So I think that's part of the issue, is that fans are still holding on to some of that anger, which that could be a problem, you could say. But I don't think the nostalgia is an issue, and wanting to remember that it was a part of, it is a part of Minnesota sports history. And I don't think there's anything wrong with remembering that, with honoring that, with bringing that back. And a lot of very talented players played for the North Stars who Minnesota fans love to reminisce on and think about. And so, yeah, I don't think there's an issue with that, as long as you do it right. And I think that if they go about it, they will find a way to honor it in the right way. And I think that's exciting. I think a lot of fans like that.
I'm glad you have confidence in the Wild doing something the right way.
This is kind of hard to mess up though, right?
I don't know that I do.
I want to chime in. We did get a comment on this on our YouTube channel. Andy W makes a good point. As long as I never have to see black Wild jerseys, I don't.
Yes.
That's a fair point. That is a fair
one.
point. Yeah. Okay. So final topic here on the Showdown. This one's a little bit, more abstract, but let's have some fun with it here. What do you have for your NHL playoff predictions? Where they're going to happen? Who's going to win? Go as wild as you'd like, Alexis.
My God, this is, in my eyes, it's a free-for-all. If you want a more specific answer, I would say the teams who naturally have that good, solid talent day in and day out, I think those teams stand the best chance. I don't think the streaky teams stand a good chance right now. I don't think the teams that caught fire right before the suspension happened stand a chance right now, which unfortunately would be the Minnesota Wild. I think those teams that have been good and were good throughout the season, the Boston teams, the Tampa Bay Lightning teams, even teams like Colorado. I know they dealt with a lot of injuries, but they have the talent. Teams like that who you don't have too much concern that they're going to just fall off the wagon for extended periods of time. Just because with this huge gap, if the season does resume at some point here within the next month or so, I just think that those streaky teams are going to feel a little bit lost. And the teams that have that natural talent day in and day out are just going to have more success, because they're really just going to pick up right where they left off. So it's a tough one. It feels like throwing a dart with my eyes closed in the middle of the night with a blindfold over my head and 5 dartboards in front of me. But that would probably be the best answer that I could give. I just think that those teams have the best chance.
No, that's fair. Tony, what do you have for NHL playoff predictions?
All right. Well, first of all, they're going to happen, because I know that the Bar Down Beauties are saying, you know what, it's the right thing to cancel the season. Locked On Wild folks are saying, you know what, it's a good idea to cancel the season. And when has the NHL ever done a good idea?
Exactly.
I'm waiting.
Yeah.
I'm waiting.
No, the NHL is going to have the playoffs, and they're going to have COVID positive appreciation night, and they're going to invite everyone who is COVID positive into the arena just to watch the games.
They are going to host the Liberate Minnesota rally in the stands.
Oh, no.
They are absolutely going to happen. The playoffs are absolutely going to happen. As for what I'm going to predict in this, I think that hockey is sometimes really stupid, especially when it comes to the playoffs, where the teams that are the best just don't get rewarded.
That's true.
That happened. And then once they don't get rewarded, we give up on them, and then we come back the next year and go like, oh, wait, how did this team do so well? I think Tampa Bay is going to win the Stanley Cup they're going to go to the Stanley Cup, I think, and they're going to win. I think a healthy Tampa Bay after several months off. You just gotta watch that. And I think for the maximum amount of entertainment, and I think I'm going to lose points for saying this, but I have to go with my convictions. I think that Colorado has a much better team than they did last year, and they were able to come in within one game within getting to the Western Conference Final. They have a much stronger defense, and they have so much star power between Cale Makar and that trio of Nathan McKinnon, Gabe Landeskog, and Mikko Rantanen. That's just a formidable trio, and they have more depth. So I am going to say, in what is going to be the most entertaining Stanley Cup final of all time that nobody can watch, it is going to be the Tampa Bay Lightning prevailing over the Colorado Avalanche.
Okay. You're telling me Torts and his Blue Jackets aren't going to sweep the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round again?
Are they even going to make the playoffs? I don't know. Are they in the playoff spot?
The Blue Jackets?
The Blue Jackets? Point percentage.
I think they're right on the bubble, or they were right on the bubble.
Oh. Can you have a sweep if they don't do a series?
True.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I never doubt John Tortorella. So if they go up against the Bolts, anything is possible.
Yeah. All right, so that's the game, everyone. Big winner, Alexis with 16 points, narrowly margining out Tony with 14.
I was one away from 17, Marcus Foligno's number.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Harder.
So,
did I get my ass kicked in this game? I got my ass kicked in Words with Friends too.
Yeah,
double whammy.
It happens. So, that's all I got. Alexis, if you want, let's just say maybe 30 seconds to say something if you want.
Oh, a victory speech?
Yeah. If you want
I didn't plan this far ahead. Sure. I just want to say that if the season does come back, I'm looking forward to it. It would be fun to see maybe modified playoffs, because how cool would that be to see, like a 3-game series or something like that. Right. It seems a little iffy if the season comes back. I know they have grand plans to make it happen, but we all miss hockey, right? So I'll take, I guess, whatever I can get at this point. But Marcus Foligno fan club never loses. We're 1-0. So this was fun. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. This was just an idea that I had one night when I literally couldn't sleep the entire night and was just coming up with podcast ideas.
And you're like, what show can I steal?
I was just thinking of things to rip off, basically, and this came to mind right away. Huge thanks. This was a lot of fun. Yeah. It was 2 or 3 in the morning at least. Only a couple hours before my son woke up. So fun.
There you go.
But anyway, yeah, thanks a ton to the Bar Down Beauties and Lockdown and Wild folks. You guys are awesome, and obviously we've had you guys on sparingly here and there, and definitely appreciate this. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank
that
you.
that was
thanks.
exciting.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Maybe we'll do it again if we don't get sued. Who knows?
No, before we go, I will give you guys each a chance to plug your respective shows before we depart. I'll let Jesse and Alexis start.
Take it away, Jesse.
Bar Down Beauties, guys. No. Releases a new episode every Monday. Alexis opens up her childhood hockey diary, which is particularly my favorite part of every episode.
It's just like a 10-year-old ranting. Yeah.
It's 2009 Minnesota Wild.
Yeah.
So crazy, right? Like, what is she talking about? She hates Calgary for a lot of reasons, apparently.
West Division, baby.
No, so every Monday, be sure to check that out. Natalie Darwitz, we chatted with her for this week's app, and plenty more to come. Next week, we've got Wes Walls and Richard Park and possibly a couple other former Minnesota Wild players joining us. So tune in.
Cool.
Tony and Joe, where can people find your podcast and anything upcoming?
Well, since Tony got to talking in the final round, I suppose I'll take this lead. Losers walk, right? You can find us.
To me, I thought you were talking about me. I was like, wow, that's a lot of smack for someone.
Said that beef, remember?
Yeah,
we're beefing.
Yeah, we are beefing, right? You can follow us at Locked On Wild on Twitter. Also check out our podcast, Locked On Wild. We are during the season, Monday through Friday. We usually do about a half-hour show, usually including guests or just, Tony and I kind of bantering back and forth too. So check that out on iTunes, on Spotify. Check that out. You can also follow me on Twitter at JoeBoo15. And I also write for zonecoverage.com. So please check that out. They did just do a phenomenal job wrapping up the Minnesota Vikings draft. And we are doing some big things starting this week surrounding the Minnesota Wild coverage as well.
Is there going to be a story about goaltending from Tony on the website by chance? Or
tomorrow? Yeah, Tuesday. That's
when people are listening to this on Tuesday, you can go read that. So thank you everyone again for joining us. You know where to find Giles and the goalie. I completely forgot how to close a podcast. So we're just
a script.
Just drop the mic.
I spaced. We're gonna call it a day. Thank you to everyone again, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Gill and the Goaltender podcast.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.